There are some doors that don't slam when they close. They click, soft, polite, the kind of sound a person makes when they've already stopped thinking about you. That's the sound I heard at 4:17 in the afternoon on my 17th birthday, standing on the wooden steps of a house I'd lived in for 2 years, and apparently never owned a single splinter of. My sister Maya was beside me, 15, 5'2" in boots she'd outgrown. She had her arms wrapped around a duffel bag like the bag was a baby, and her breath was coming out in those short little clouds you get when someone's trying not to cry on the inside of their own face. Behind us, the porch light flicked off. I heard the deadbolt turn a second time, like the first one hadn't been final enough. "Liam," Maya said, "she really did it." "Yeah, she really actually did it." "Yeah, Maya, I know." I didn't turn around. I didn't pound on the door. I didn't beg. I'd watched our Aunt Carol's mouth get thinner and thinner over 2 years of dinners where she'd reach across the table and take the meat off our plates and set it back on the serving dish for tomorrow. I'd watched her open electric bills and look at me like I was the one who'd plugged in the world. I knew the kind of woman she was, the kind who doesn't slam doors, the kind who closes them like a banker closing a folder. In my coat pocket, I had $84 in cash, my birth certificate, and a folded yellow piece of paper she'd shoved at me that morning like she was handing me a parking ticket. A deed, an old one, to my grandfather's farm 3 counties north, in a place called Northwood, on a piece of land she'd been calling worthless since the funeral. If you've ever been told the only thing left of your family is a piece of paper somebody else couldn't be bothered to throw away, hit that subscribe button. Stay with us. Because what me and Maya found behind the old barn on that worthless farm, the thing my grandfather had been hiding for 40 years before any of us were born, that's not the kind of story a person should have to tell alone. If you're enjoying the story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. I want to back up a little, because if I just tell you what we found behind that barn, you won't understand why it mattered. You'll think it's a treasure story. It's not. It's a story about a man who'd been called a failure his whole life, and who buried his answer where only the right kind of person would look. My name is Liam Vance. My sister is Maya. Our parents died on a Wednesday in October when I was 15 and Maya was 13. Drunk driver on a county road on the way home from a hardware store. They'd gone to buy a new latch for our chicken coop. The latch is still in the truck, somewhere in a county impound lot. They never got home to put it on. My dad was Frank Vance. My grandfather was Calvin Vance. Cal to everyone who knew him, Pop to me. Our mom was Carol's older sister, Diane. After the funeral, the state put us with Aunt Carol because she was the only blood we had left. Carol lived 3 hours south, in a brick house in a development called Stone Ridge that didn't have a single stone or a ridge in it. Her husband had walked out the year before, and she kept the house in a divorce, and she ran it like a tight little ship that had no use for 2 extra deckhands. For 2 years she fed us, more or less. She drove us to school, more or less. She filled out paperwork. She sighed a lot. She was always on the phone with somebody, always behind a closed kitchen door. And what I call those phone calls was always the same. They eat so much. The boy keeps growing. I didn't ask for this. I'm doing what I can. Once, through the door, I heard her say, "I'm getting nothing for this." Nothing. People act like the state pays you. The state doesn't pay you. I remember thinking, even then, that doesn't sound right, because I'd seen forms come to the house. I'd seen envelopes from a county office. I'd seen her take them straight into her bedroom and close the door. I was 16. I didn't know what I didn't know. I just figured grown-ups kept secrets the way kids keep candy. Out of reach, in places that smelled like soap. The morning of my 17th birthday, she sat me down at the kitchen table and slid a manila envelope across at me like a poker dealer. Inside was my birth certificate, my social security card, $84 cash, and the yellow deed I told you about. She said, "You're a man now, Liam. You need to start standing on your own 2 feet. I've done what I can. I love you. But this house can't carry you and your sister anymore." I said, "Maya's 15. She said, "I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do." I said, Are you putting Maya out too? She said, I'm not running a boarding house, Liam. If you go, she goes, that's just how it is. That's how it is. 3 words she said like she was reading them off a label. I'll never forget the sound of those 3 words. Like she'd practiced. She gave us until 5. We were out at 3 minutes after. Now here's the thing about that yellow deed. Carol had mentioned it before. Twice. Once at the funeral, when she was talking to her lawyer in a hallway and didn't know I was around the corner. Once at Christmas the first year, when she was on the phone with somebody and I caught the tail end of it. Both times she said the same thing. That farm is a sinkhole. Leans up to the rafters. Back taxes. Place is condemned, basically. The county would take it tomorrow if anyone bothered to ask. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She was the adult. She had the paperwork. She had the lawyer's phone numbers. I was a kid whose whole world had ended on a Wednesday in October, and I didn't have the energy to question anything anybody told me. I just got up. I went to school. I came home. I tried to keep Maya from hearing the worst of the phone calls. That was my whole job for 2 years. But on the bus that night, riding north into a darkness, so complete it felt like the world had been folded up and put in a drawer, I started thinking about that farm in a different way. Not as a sinkhole, not as a ruin, as a memory. Because I had memories of that farm. Real ones, sharp ones, the kind that don't fade. I remembered the smell of the barn. Sweet hay and motor oil and something cool underneath, like wet stone. I remember my grandfather's hands. They were the size of dinner plates, and they had a permanent pattern of fine cuts and old calluses. And he could pick me up under one arm like I was a sack of feed. I remembered him walking me along the back of the property, past the barn, to a place where the ground sloped down toward a creek. I remembered him pointing at a spot in the dirt and saying, Liam boy, you remember this rock. You remember this exact rock right here. One day, this rock is going to mean something to you. I had been 6 years old. I had nodded the way kids nod at a grown-up, with my whole body, not understanding a word. He died when I was 7. A heart thing, fast, in his sleep. We went to the funeral, and I remember my dad standing at the grave with his hat in his hands and saying to the dirt, I'm sorry, Pop. I'm sorry I couldn't fix it for you. I didn't know what it was. I asked my mom in the car on the way home. She said, your grandfather lost the farm a few years before you were born. Sweetheart, some bad business. Your dad always thought there was something he could have done, but the farm was right there. We'd just been to the farm. The barn was right there. The rock was right there. I didn't understand. My mom said, he kept a piece of it, honey. The old farmhouse and the barn and a little bit of land around them. The rest he had to sell. It broke his heart. A piece of it. The barn. The rock he'd shown me. A piece. That memory. The rock. My grandfather's hand. One day, this is going to mean something, was sitting in my head on the bus that night while Maya slept against my shoulder. And I was turning it over the way you turn over a coin in a pocket. We got off the bus in Northwood at 3:20 in the morning. The town was 3 streetlights and a closed gas station, and a diner with a sign that said Eat in red neon. The address on the deed was 6 miles down a county road. We walked. The snow had started, not much, just a fine sifting like flour through a sieve, and our boots crunched on the shoulder road that didn't have a single car on it for an hour. Around mile 4, Maya said, Liam, what if it's gone? It's not gone. What if it's just a foundation? What if there's not even a roof? There's a roof, Maya. How do you know? Because Pop built it. She didn't argue with that. She just walked. Around mile 5.5, the road bent and the trees opened up, and we came over a low rise, and there it was. The mailbox first, a rusted thing on a leaning post, with vents in white paint that the weather had eaten down to a ghost. Then the driveway, 2 ruts in snow with a stripe of dead grass between them. Then the house. Maya was right to be scared of what we'd find. The house had not been kind to itself. The porch sagged on the left side like a man with a bad hip. 2 of the front windows were boarded up with plywood that had gone gray. The paint was the kind of paint that isn't paint anymore, just a memory of paint flaking off the wood underneath. A cinder block held the front door closed from the outside. I stopped on the driveway and just looked at it, and in that moment, I understood why Aunt Carol had said what she'd said. From the road, this looked like a tear down. This looked like a thing you'd ask the county to bulldoze. And then I lifted my eyes, and behind the house, 50 yards back, I saw the barn. The barn was different. The barn stood the way an old soldier stands. The roof line was straight. The siding was that deep oxblood red, that old barn paint goes when it's been on there for 60 years, and weathered into the wood like a tattoo. There was a small lean-to off the back, also straight, also red. The cupola on top still had its weather vane. A tin rooster, missing one foot, but still there, still pointed at the wind. That barn had not given up. That barn had been built by a man who didn't build things to give up. Maya saw it the same time I did. She said, "Liam." I said, "I know." We didn't even bother with the house that night. We crunched through the snow around the side, past a propane tank and a stack of old fence posts and a woodpile that was mostly bark, and we tried the big sliding door on the front of the barn, frozen to the rail. Wouldn't budge. We went around to the side and found a smaller door, a regular man-sized door, with a heavy old padlock on a hasp. The padlock was solid, but the wood the hasp was screwed into had gone soft with rot. I kicked it twice, and the whole hasp came out of the door frame in a shower of dry splinters. The barn opened up like a cathedral. The air inside was cold but dry, and it smelled exactly the way I remembered it, hay and oil and stone. A few weak shafts of moonlight came down through the roof boards in long pale stripes. The main floor was mostly empty. An old tractor in one corner rusted the floor. Some hay bales gone gray with age. A workbench along the back wall that had been built into the structure itself, like a piece of the building. We dropped our bags. We pulled out the 2 thin blankets from Carol's house. We sat down on a hay bale that was more dust than hay, and we ate cold hot dogs out of foil from the bus station, and we watched our breath steam in the dark, and Maya said, "Liam, what are we going to do?" I said, "We're going to sleep, and tomorrow we're going to figure out. Liam, we have $120. I know how much we have. Liam." "Maya, go to sleep." She put her head on my shoulder. Within 5 minutes, she was breathing slow. I sat there with my back against the workbench, and I watched the moonlight crawl across the floor, and I thought about my grandfather, and about one day this rock is going to mean something to you, and about the way Aunt Carol had slid that envelope across the table that morning like she was getting rid of evidence. I didn't sleep until almost dawn. What woke me up was a sound, a thump, a deep, low thump, like somebody dropped a bag of flour onto a wood floor in the next room. I sat up. Maya was still asleep. I held my breath and listened. It came again. Thump. Pause. Thump. It wasn't coming from outside. It wasn't the wind. It was coming from underneath us, from under the barn floor. I got very, very still. I'd grown up in the country part-time. I knew about animals under barns, possums, raccoons, a fox if you were unlucky. I'd never heard one make a sound like that. This was rhythmic. This was steady. Thump. Pause. Thump. It went on for maybe a minute. Then it stopped. The barn was silent again, except for Maya's breathing and the very faint tick of a beam somewhere settling against the cold. I sat up the rest of the night with my back to the workbench and the camping lantern in my lap, off, in case I needed it fast. The thump didn't come again. By the time the first gray light started leaking in through the cracks, I'd half convinced myself I'd dreamed it. Maya woke up at maybe 7. Her hair was full of hay dust. She looked at me and said, "Liam, did you sleep?" I said, "A little." She said, "Did you hear something last night?" And that's when I knew I hadn't dreamed it. We didn't say much for the next hour. We ate granola bars. We split a bottle of water. I went outside to use the bathroom behind a tree and came back in and stomped the snow off my boots. The morning light was pearl gray and the world outside was completely still. That deep country stillness that city kids never really get used to, where you can hear your own pulse in your ears. I said, "Maya, I want to look at something." She said, "The thump." I said, "The thump." We started in the corner, where we'd slept and worked our way out. I stomped on every floorboard. Most of them sounded the same, solid, dense, the dull thok of old, overpacked dirt. We crossed the barn that way for 20 minutes. 2 kids playing a game with no rules. It was Maya who found it. She was over near the back wall, near the workbench, and she stomped, and the sound was different. Not hollow exactly, just different. A flatter sound, a resonant sound, like the difference between knocking on a wall and knocking on a door. She said, "Liam, come here." I came. I stomped. Same sound. Flat. Resonant. Wrong. We got down on our hands and knees. The boards in this section were the same wide old planks as everywhere else. But if you looked close, really close, you could see that the line where two of them met was just a hair too clean. Like somebody had cut them with a saw, instead of letting them just butt up against each other the way old floorboards do. I ran my finger along the seam, and then I felt it. A notch. A finger-sized notch in the side of one of the planks. Tucked back, so far you'd never see it from above. I hooked my finger in. I pulled. The plank came up. It wasn't a single plank. It was a hatch. 3 boards joined underneath into one piece, hinged on a length of iron strap that had been recessed so deep into the wood that the floor looked seamless from above. Someone had built this thing to disappear. When I lifted it, the smell that came up was not a barn smell. It was a deeper smell. Cooler, drier, stone and old paper, and something faint and waxy, like a candle that hadn't been lit in a long time. I shone my phone flashlight down. A wooden ladder. Brand new looking, or no, not new. Maintained. The wood was clean. The rungs were tight. Somebody had been keeping this ladder in shape for a long time. It went down maybe 8 feet. Past the ladder, the flashlight caught the edge of a stone wall. Maya whispered, "Liam, there's a room." I went down first. I made her wait at the top of my phone on flashlight mode pointed at my back. The ladder didn't creak. It didn't shift. Whoever had built this had built it the way Pop built things. To last. At the bottom, I stepped off onto a floor of fitted flagstone. I turned in a slow circle. It wasn't a root cellar. A root cellar is a hole in the ground with shelves. This was a room. 12 feet by 12, maybe. Walls of stacked fieldstone, mortared neat and tight. A flagstone floor, swept clean. A low ceiling of heavy timber beams. Thick as my thigh, blackened with age but not rotten. Somebody had treated them. Along one wall, wooden shelves bracketed into the stone. Along another wall, a workbench, a real one, not a barn bench, with a vise in the corner and a row of hand tools on a leather strap. In the far corner, a small cast-iron stove with flue that ran up to the ceiling, and next to it a tidy stack of split wood. But that wasn't what stopped my breath. What stopped my breath was that the shelves were full. Mason jars, dozens of them, lined up like soldiers. Peaches and syrup, green beans, tomato sauce, blackberry jam, something that looked like applesauce. Tin canisters stamped with old labels. Wax-sealed jugs. Folded wool blankets in a wooden crate. A kerosene lamp with a full reservoir. Boxes of Strike Anywhere matches in tin tubes. A first aid kit in a green metal box. A hand-cranked radio. A set of enameled tin plates and cups. 2 folding canvas cots leaning against the wall. The canvas still tight. This was not a hiding place. This was a home. A small, careful, patient home. Set up for 2 people waiting. On the workbench, lined up neat as a place setting, were 3 things. A leather-bound journal. A flat metal lockbox the color of moss. And a creamy white envelope with 2 words written on it in a hand I knew. A hand I'd seen on the back of a Christmas card when I was 6 years old. My sparrows. I don't know how long I stood there. Maya was calling down from the top of the ladder. "Liam? Liam, what is it? Liam, talk to me." But I couldn't talk. My grandfather called me a sparrow when I was little because I was small for my age and chattered too much. He called Maya his sparrow because by the time she was born, he was already making her a nickname out of a memory of me. 2 sparrows. My sparrows. I called up to her. "Come down. You need to come down." She came down. She saw the room. She saw the jars. She saw the workbench. She read the envelope. And her hand went to her mouth, and she sat down on the bottom rung of the ladder hard enough that I thought it would crack. I said, "Maya, he left this for us." She said, Liam, when?" And I didn't know. I didn't know if Pop had built this last week of his life or 30 years before. I didn't know if my dad had known about it. I didn't know if my mom had. All I knew was He had built a room under his barn, and he left an envelope on the bench that said my sparrows. And somewhere on the floor above us there had been a thump in the middle of the night that I couldn't explain. I picked up the envelope. The wax seal cracked under my thumb. Inside were 5 pages of yellow legal pad, written in my grandfather's tight engineer's hand, and one folded document with a heavy bond of something legal. I sat down on the cot frame. Maya sat next to me. I read it out loud, because I couldn't read it any other way. My sparrows, it began. If you're reading this, it means a few things, and none of them are easy. It means I am gone. It means you are old enough to find what's hidden. And it means somebody, somewhere along the way, did to you what was done to me. I am sorry for that. I built this room hoping you'd never need it. I built it knowing you might. Let me tell you what I know that nobody else does. In 1978, when your father was a boy, a man named Marcus Thorne came to this county with a smile and a fountain pen. He told me he was an investor. He told me there was money to be made if I'd let him in on the operation, a partnership. He called it modernization. He spoke the way a snake moves, all curve, all surface. Your grandmother didn't trust him. I should have listened to her. I trusted him instead. The papers I signed weren't a partnership. They were a series of structured loans designed to fail. By the time I understood what I'd signed, the debt had quadrupled. I lost 212 acres to that man and his shell companies. I kept the house, the barn, and 10 acres around them, because that parcel had been carved out separately when my own father bought the land in 1939, and Thorne's lawyers missed it. They missed it the way a hawk misses a mouse in tall grass. By the time they noticed, the deadline to consolidate had passed, and that 10 acres was legally untouchable. Thorne is still alive. He runs a development corporation, now called Viridian Estates. The 212 acres he took from me are still his. He has done the same thing to 4 other families in this county that I know of, probably more. Your father knew none of this. He thought I was a failure. I let him think it because the truth would have eaten him alive, and he had a wife and a son and a baby girl and a life to live. I wrote the truth down anyway. The truth is in the journal on this bench. Every meeting, every signature, every check, every name. I copied the documents. I kept the records. I built this room to keep them dry. The metal box is for you. There is enough money in it to last a year if you are careful. There's a deed to the 10 acres, free and clear. There's the name and number of a man named Arthur Abernathy in town. He is honest. He is slow, but he is honest. Show him the journal. Show him the deed. He will know what to do. I want you to know one more thing. The trust. There is a trust. Your grandmother, and I set it up the year your sister was born. Your father couldn't touch it. His wife couldn't touch it. The terms are strict, and the trust is administered by Mr. Abernathy. It pays a monthly stipend to whoever is your guardian for your care. It will continue to pay until Liam is 21 or Maya is 18, whichever comes later. If you've been told this farm is worthless, if you've been told there is nothing, that is a lie. That has been a lie for as long as someone has been collecting the stipend in your name and telling you there's no money for you. Do what is right, my sparrows. Don't waste it on hate. But don't let them take from you what was already taken from me. Your grandfather, Cal. I folded the letter. I put it down on the bench. Maya was crying. Not loud. Just tears running down her face without any sound. She said, she's been getting paid. Liam, she's been getting paid for us. The whole time. I said, I know. She told us we were costing her money. I know, Maya. She made me feel like she couldn't finish. She didn't have to. I picked up the lockbox. The key was on a nail in the wall above the bench. I unlocked it. Inside, there was a stack of cash in a waterproof pouch. I counted it later. It was $11,400 in 10s and 20s and 50s, money my grandfather had skimmed off a barn over a decade of careful invisible saving. There was a sealed manila envelope marked deed, 10 acres. There was a smaller envelope with a card from Arthur Abernathy, attorney at law, Northwood. There was a passbook from a county bank with my grandfather's neat handwriting on the front. Trust account, Vance children. Do not transfer. And in the bottom of the box, wrapped in oilcloth, there was a key, bigger than the one on the deed envelope. Heavy, iron, old style, with a tag tied to it on twine in the same handwriting. Behind the barn, east wall, 3 feet down. I held that key in my hand. Maya looked at it. She said, "Liam, there's more." I said, "There's more." We climbed up out of the room. We walked out of the barn. The sun had come up while we'd been underground, and the snow had stopped, and the world was so bright off the snow it hurt my eyes. We went around to the back of the barn, on the east side, where the lean-to was. The wall at the base was fieldstone, the same kind as inside the room. Cold, solid, half buried in the dead grass. 3 feet down. We started digging. We had to use a shovel from the lean-to because our hands wouldn't go through the frozen ground. But 3 feet down, the shovel hit something that wasn't dirt and wasn't stone. It was iron. We cleared it out. It was a hatch, a full second hatch, set into a stone-lined shaft, with a ring pull on top and a keyhole the exact shape of the iron key. I want to tell you something before I go on. There was a moment, kneeling in that snow with my fingers numb and Maya breathing fog beside me, where I almost stopped, where I thought, you've got the room, you've got the cash, you've got the journal, you've got the trust. Go to the lawyer, go to the bank. Don't open this, because the room had been a gift. The room had been preparation. But this, a second hatch, with its own key behind the barn, this wasn't a gift. This was a secret. And secrets are heavier than gifts. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. I put the key in the lock. I turned it. The mechanism clicked over with a sound like a door deciding something. I pulled the ring. Underneath was a vault. I'm using the word carefully. It wasn't a room. It wasn't a cellar. It was a vault, 6 feet by 6 feet, walls of poured concrete a foot thick, a floor more concrete with a drain in the middle, and a steel beam ceiling. A real built thing. The kind of thing you'd only build if you were planning to put something in it that nobody could be allowed to find. A short steel ladder went down. At the bottom, mounted to the back wall, was a steel cabinet, military green, locked with a combination dial. On the floor in front of the cabinet, on a wooden pallet to keep it off the concrete, was a chest. Old, cedar, banded in iron. Heavy, taped to the lid of the chest, was an index card, my grandfather's writing. Liam, the combination is the year your father was born followed by the year your sister was born. Open the cabinet first, then the chest, then sit down before you read anything. Pop, my dad was born in 1956. Maya was born in 2008. I dialed 56-08 both ways until the cabinet's tumblers fell. The cabinet had 4 shelves. Each shelf was full of documents in clear archival sleeves, organized chronologically, labeled in my grandfather's hand. Viridian, loan file originals. Viridian, correspondence. Viridian, shell corporations, names and filings. The other families, Henderson. The other families, Kowalski. The other families, Reed. The other families, Delacroix. On the bottom shelf, in a separate sleeve, a microcassette tape and a small handheld recorder with a card. Thorne admits, 1981. Transcript inside. A microcassette from 1981 of Marcus Thorne admitting what he'd done. With a transcript, the chest, when I opened it, held 3 things. The original deeds for 212 acres of farmland. The deeds my grandfather had been forced to sign over, but with carbon copies of every page, every margin note, every date stamp. A bound register of every dollar Thorne and his shell companies had moved through accounts my grandfather had been able to trace, going back to 1978. And at the bottom, in a flat wooden box, a sheaf of mineral rights leases. I want you to understand what mineral rights are, because I didn't before that day. When you own land in this part of the country, you can own the land on the surface and also own everything underneath it. The water, the gas, the oil, the rock. They can be sold separately. A man can own 100 acres and not own a single drop of the water under it. And the opposite, a man can own no acres at all and still own the rights to everything beneath the dirt, of someone else's farm. When Marcus Thorne took my grandfather's 212 acres, he took the surface. He took the topsoil and the fences and the timber and the right to build on it. He had not taken, because my grandfather had quietly, legally, separately reserved him in 1978 in the name of his 10-acre parcel, the mineral rights underneath. For 40 years, Marcus Thorne had been farming and developing land on top of mineral rights that legally belonged to my grandfather's homestead. And as of about 30 seconds before, those mineral rights belonged to me and Maya. I sat down on the floor of that vault, on cold concrete, and I started to laugh. Not a happy laugh, a cracked laugh. The laugh of a person whose whole understanding of his life has just been turned upside down and shaken out like a coat pocket. Maya was on her knees beside me, holding the leases in her hands like they were on fire. She said, "Liam, are these worth something?" I said, "Maya, I don't know yet, but I think yes." We didn't tell anybody right away. We climbed out of the vault. We closed both hatches. We slid the floor plank back in the barn. We made sure everything looked exactly the way it had looked when we'd come in. I think both of us understood, without saying it, that this was a kind of secret that needed to be opened slowly, in front of the right people, with the right witnesses. That afternoon, with our hands still shaking, we walked the 6 miles back into Northwood. We bought a burner phone at the gas station and a hot meal at the diner. The diner was warm and smelled like coffee and bacon, and the woman behind the counter said, "You kids are new." And I said, "We're Cal Vance's grandchildren." And she went very still and put her hand over her mouth, and then she came around the counter and hugged us both. She didn't ask questions. She just brought us pie. I will remember the taste of that pie until I die. Then we went to the office of Arthur Abernathy. His office was on the second floor over the hardware store. The stairs creaked. The frosted glass on his door said Abernathy in flaking gold paint. Inside, the receptionist was a woman of about 60 with reading glasses on a chain. She looked up when we came in. I said, "My name is Liam Vance. This is my sister Maya. Our grandfather was Calvin Vance. He told us to come find Mr. Abernathy." The receptionist took her glasses off and set them down on her desk. She said very quietly, "Sweetheart, sit down. I'll get him right now." Arthur Abernathy was older than I'd expected, maybe 75. White hair, kind eyes behind thick glasses, a tie that didn't quite match his shirt. He came out of his back office and looked at the two of us, Maya in a coat too thin, me with hay dust still in my hair, and he said, "Lord Almighty, Cal Sparrows." He said it just like that, in Arthur Abernathy's office. Over the next 4 hours, the lid came off everything. He poured us coffee in 2 mugs that had the local Lions Club logo on them. He sat us in 2 leather chairs that had probably been bought before I was born. He pulled file after file from a locked cabinet that hadn't been opened in 12 years. Files my grandfather had walked into this office with in 1998, the year before he died, and laid out on the same desk, and made Mr. Abernathy swear in writing that he would not open them until a Vance grandchild walked through that door of legal age, holding a deed they shouldn't have, asking the right questions. "I have wondered for 12 years, Mr. Abernathy said, if anyone was ever going to come. The trust was real. A trust my grandfather had set up the year of Maya's birth, funded by money from the sale of timber off the back of the farm in the years before he died, plus a small life insurance policy he kept paid up by working extra hours at a feed mill in town when nobody knew he had to. The corpus, when it was funded, was just over $200,000. Conservatively invested in the years since by Mr. Abernathy's hand, it had grown to nearly $400. The monthly stipend it paid had gone to my mother first, then to my father when she passed, then, after the accident, to Aunt Carol, $2,600 a month, Mr. Abernathy said, every single month for 23 months, into an account in her name. He showed me the wire records. I saw the dates. I saw the amounts. I saw my own birthday on a payment line. Minor's care, Vance Liam, 17th birthday allotment, $4,000 disbursed. She had collected an extra $4,000 on a day she'd put us out with 84. I sat there with the wire records in my hand, and I did the math out loud. $2,600 a month, 23 months, plus the $4,000 birthday disbursement. $63,800. She had been given in cash $63,800 over 2 years to take care of 2 children whose parents had just been killed, and she had told us we were eating her out of house and home. And on the day she could legally evict us, she had put $84 in our hands and locked the door behind us. $63,800 in, $84 out. Mr. Abernathy did not say anything ugly about her. He just took his glasses off, wiped them on his tie, and said, "Liam, Maya, I am so deeply sorry. I trusted that woman to act in your interest. She gave me sworn affidavits about your well-being every quarter, signed and notarized, testifying that you were healthy, well cared for, attending school, receiving the standard care your grandfather's trust required. She lied on every single one. That is fraud. That is criminal. That is a notary public signature on a document she knew to be false. We're going to make that right." He stood up and walked to a small safe in the corner of his office. He dialed a combination by memory. He pulled out a thin manila folder. He brought it back to the desk and laid it open in front of me. "These are the affidavits," he said. There were 8 of them. Quarterly reports. 2 years' worth. The most recent one dated 3 weeks before my birthday. Each one signed in Aunt Carol's tight, looping signature. Each one sworn before a notary in her county. Each one stating that the minor children Liam and Maya Vance are residing in my home, attending school regularly, receiving adequate food, clothing, and medical care, and are appropriately enrolled in extracurricular and social activities suitable to their age. The most recent one, dated 3 weeks before she'd handed me $84 and pointed at the door, had a checkbox at the bottom, a single line of pre-printed text. "I confirm that I have no present intention to terminate my guardianship of the above-named minor children." The box was checked. Her initials were beside it. CM. Maya read it over my shoulder. She didn't cry this time. She got very, very quiet. She said she planned it. I said, "Yeah." "Liam." She knew. 3 weeks ago. She signed a paper that said she wasn't going to throw us out. And then she did it anyway. On the exact day she didn't legally have to keep me. "Yeah, Maya. That's not even. That's not just being mean. That's paperwork." That was the word she used. Paperwork. And it was the right word. Because what Aunt Carol had done was not the work of a hot-blooded, impulsive person. It was the work of a person who had sat down at a kitchen table at some point and figured out, on the back of an envelope, exactly how long she had to keep us before the law would let her stop. It was a calendar event. It was a deadline. She had marked our childhoods on her wall calendar and watched it tick down like an oven timer. Mr. Abernathy let us sit with it. He didn't rush us. After a while, he closed the folder and said, "Now, there is also the matter of the farm itself, and the deed in your hand." Then I told him about the room, about the journal, about the cabinet, about the chest, about the leases. I have never in my life seen a man's face change the way Arthur Abernathy's face changed in that moment. It went from grief, real grief, the grief of a man who had failed his old friend Cal Vance without knowing it, to a slow, lit-up, almost frightening calm. The calm of an old lawyer who has waited his whole career for one specific case to walk through his door. He said, "Son, may I see the leases?" I had brought one with me, just one, in an inside pocket. I unfolded it on his desk. He read it. He read it again. He turned it over. He read the back. He pulled a magnifying loupe out of his desk drawer and read the notarial seal in the corner. He read the date. He read the surveyor's plat number. He set the loupe down very, very slowly, like it might break if he set it down hard. He said, "Liam, do you know what this is?" I said, "I think it's mineral rights to 212 acres. He said, "It is mineral rights to 212 acres that are currently sitting under a Viridian Estates housing development that broke ground last spring. Viridian sold 96 lots on that land. They cannot legally sell or develop 1 inch deeper than the surface without these leases. They have been operating, building, and selling for 12 years on land where the substrata legally belong to your family. Do you understand what I am telling you?" He stood up. He walked to a wall map of the county that had been pinned up behind his desk for so long that the corners had yellowed. He put his finger on a green-shaded area and traced its outline. This is the original Vance parcel. 222 acres. Your great-grandfather Augustus Vance bought it in 1939, 3 months before the war started, from a man who was selling it cheap because his sons had moved to Detroit to work in the auto plants. It was his pride. He paid for it with cash from a tobacco crop and a small inheritance. He registered at the county courthouse on a Friday afternoon, and that night he came home and told his wife, your great-grandmother, that the Vance family would never again be in a position where another man's mood could put them off their own land. That was the philosophy of this farm. That was the philosophy your grandfather inherited. He moved his finger to a small square in the middle of the green. This is a 10-acre homestead parcel, carved out separately by your great-grandfather in 1939, listed under a separate deed and a separate parcel number, because, and your grandfather told me the story himself, Augustus had read in a farming periodical that month about a banker in Iowa who had foreclosed on a man's whole farm and put his family out, and Augustus said no banker will ever put a Vance off the homestead, and he made it legally distinct. He paid an extra $18 to the county recorder for the separation. $18. In 1939, he moved his finger to the green border. In 1981, when your grandfather signed away 212 acres under duress, Marcus Thorne's lawyers prepared the transfer documents. They were a top-tier firm. They were thorough, but they made one mistake. They worked from the original deed of acquisition, the 1939 deed for the entire original parcel, and they failed to check the homestead carve-out. They assumed all 222 acres were on one parcel. By the time they discovered the 10-acre carve-out existed as a separate legal entity, it was past the contractual deadline to amend, and your grandfather refused to sign anything else. They had to leave it. 10 acres of stubborn old paperwork that they couldn't legally pry loose. He smiled a small, tight, satisfied smile. Your grandfather told me on the day he walked into this office in 1998, Arthur, those boys with their fancy suits, they thought they had me. They had 212 acres. They didn't have my mineral rights. And someday when there's a Vance grandchild standing where you're standing, those mineral rights are going to come home. He looked at me. He looked at Maya. Today is that day. Maya said very small, Are we okay? Arthur Abernathy looked at her for a long moment over his glasses. Then he stood up, walked around his desk, and put one big tweed-jacketed hand on her shoulder. He said, Sweetheart, you are more than okay. You are home. The next 6 months are a blur to me even now. I'll give you the bones of it, because the bones are what matter. Mr. Abernathy did not handle it himself. He referred us, with our permission, to a firm in the city, a woman named Eleanor Vance, no relation, who specialized in real estate fraud and racketeering. She was sharp the way a knife is sharp. She took one look at my grandfather's filing cabinet, which we eventually moved, document by document, into a safe deposit box at the county bank under 3 separate signatures, and she said, Liam, your grandfather was the best paralegal I have ever met, and he wasn't even a paralegal. This is the most thoroughly documented 40-year fraud case I have ever seen in my career. We are not going to lose. We did not lose. The first move was emergency guardianship. Mr. Abernathy filed a petition the morning after we walked into his office. Within 10 days, I had been granted emancipation, and Maya had been placed under my legal guardianship with court oversight, with the trust paying her support directly through Mr. Abernathy as administrator. Aunt Carol got the petition served at her front door on a Tuesday morning. I was told later that she signed without contest, without a lawyer, without a word. I don't know if that was guilt or strategy. I will probably never know. The second move was the criminal complaint. Eleanor's firm filed a federal RICO complaint against Viridian Estates and Marcus Thorne personally, racketeering, mail fraud, wire fraud, predatory lending in violation of state usury statutes, fraudulent transfer, and trespass on mineral interests. The microcassette tape was real. The transcript was real. 2 of the 4 other families my grandfather had named, Henderson and Kowalski, were still in the area. Mr. Abernathy reached out to both. The Henderson son was a man in his late 50s who had been bagging groceries at the IGA for 20 years because his family's farm had been taken from him at 26. He came to Eleanor's office and cried in the lobby and signed everything she put in front of him, The third move was the civil suit on the mineral rights. Eleanor walked into Viridian's offices with a cease and desist on the mineral interests and a notice of intent to sue for 12 years of conversion damages. Within 48 hours, Viridian's general counsel was on the phone offering to settle. They didn't know about the criminal complaint yet. They thought it was just the leases. When Eleanor told them, on a conference call, that the criminal complaint had been filed 3 days earlier and was going to be unsealed the following Monday, the line went silent for almost 30 seconds. Eleanor said later it was the longest 30 seconds of her career. She could hear, on her end, 2 lawyers and the CFO and the chief operating officer all sitting in a conference room realizing simultaneously that there was no way out of the building they were sitting in. She said one of them coughed. One of them whispered something. Then their general counsel said, in a voice that had aged 10 years in a minute, "We need to call you back." They called back 2 hours later. By then, they had Marcus Thorne on a separate line. I was there for that second call. Eleanor put us in a conference room with a glass wall and put the phone on speaker on a polished table. Maya wasn't there. Eleanor had said no, and she'd been right. This wasn't a thing for a 15-year-old to sit on. Mr. Abernathy was there, in his wrinkled tweed, sitting next to me. Eleanor sat across from us with a yellow legal pad in front of her. 3 of her associates sat against the wall. Marcus Thorne came on the line. I had a picture of him in my head from my grandfather's journal. A smooth man, silver-haired, always smiling. The kind of man who could sell a winter coat to a fish. The man whose voice came over that speaker was not that man. The man whose voice came over that speaker was a 78-year-old who had just been told that everything he had built for 40 years had been resting on a missing legal document, and that the missing document was no longer missing, and that the grandson of a man he had thought was beaten was sitting in a conference room with the document in his hand. He said, "Mr. Vance, are you on this line?" I said, "I am." He said, "I knew your grandfather." I said, "I know." There was a long pause. Eleanor was watching me. Mr. Abernathy was watching me. The associates were watching me. I had not prepared anything. I hadn't known I was going to speak. I hadn't known he was going to speak directly to me. Marcus Thorne said, Your grandfather was a man of exceptional character. I want you to know I respected him. I want you to know that whatever happened between us, in that period, it was business, son. It was business, and business is a thing that... I said, "Mr. Thorne." He stopped. I said, "Mr. Thorne, my grandfather wrote about you in a journal. Do you know what he called you in that journal?" A pause. "No." I said, "He called you a snake. He said you move like a snake. He said your handshake was a thing he could feel for days afterward, like an oil that wouldn't wash off. He wrote that the day after you took 212 acres from him, he sat on the back porch of the farmhouse for 9 hours without moving, and that my grandmother brought him a sandwich at noon, and another at 6, and that he didn't eat either of them, and that what kept him on that porch and not in the barn looking for a rope was the thought of his unborn grandchildren. Mr. Thorne, he wrote that. He wrote that down. We have it. We have the journal. We have the tape. We have your voice on a tape from 1981 admitting to my grandfather, in his own kitchen, that the structured loans were designed to fail. We have the bank records of the 4 shell corporations you ran the money through. We have signed statements from 2 of the other families you did this to. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.